Hi, welcome to today's lecture. We're going to continue to talk about something we started in the previous presentation, and that's interspecific interaction. Before I mentioned, we're going to talk about Gauss Principle and so on today, so we can continue there. So Gauss was a Russian scientist. He lived around 1930s or so, and that was the time he actually performed this lab experiment he's now known for. And that was the experiment that was driven by a Lotka-Voltaire equation of interspecific competition. This is what we talked about in the previous presentation. So he was taking two different species of Paramecium. You can see it here, a microorganism. So one was a Paramecium aurelia, the other was Paramecium caudatum. And the thing is that Paramecium aurelia had a higher rate of population growth than Paramecium caudatum, and this species could tolerate a higher population density. So what happened is that when Gauss introduced both species into one tube that were containing a fixed amount of bacteria food, the Paramecium caudatum died out, and this is what you can see in this graph. So as you can see, the Paramecium aurelia, how it was working well on its own, and this is where the population were mixed. So Paramecium aurelia kept improving the population number continuously in a mixed population as well, while Paramecium caudatum couldn't strive with the mixed population conditions, and it died out. As you can see, the number of the density of population is dropping in the mixed population. He also took one more experiment, and in this other experiment he took Paramecium caudatum, the one species that lost in the previous experiment, and he mixed it with Paramecium bursaria, and these two species actually coexisted because the Paramecium caudatum fed on bacteria suspended in the solution, where Paramecium bursaria confined its feeding to bacteria at the bottom of the tube. So basically, if you remember the story of niche, these two species had different niches, different needs in food mandatories, so they actually succeeded to coexist, and each species used food available for its own, so they basically succeeded to coexist. Performing these two experiments, Gauss has ended up with this conclusion: two species that have identical ecological requirements cannot exist in the same area at the same time. And this is basically what we know today is Gauss's principle of exclusion. The performances and competitive availability, species can be influenced by an array of environmental factors that directly influence physiological performance, yet are not consumable resources over which individuals compete. So it doesn't have to be food, basically. This is what it means. So for the example, the environmental factors such as temperature or soil or water pH, and then relative humidity or salinity, but also light availability, as I talked in the previous presentations, it can directly influence physiological processes related to plant growth and reproduction, yet they are not consumable resources that species compete over. So in this picture, for example, you can notice a pattern of seed germination of 5 annual plant species along a gradient of temperature. So see this germination percentage, and this is the temperature. So you can see different species and how their germination is turned on by different temperature and dependent on the percentage of it. So for example, see this type of datura can only germinate when temperature reaches almost 20 degrees, and this is close to 30. It's the highest percentage of the germination, while the species of ambrosia has the highest spreading and the highest tolerance of different temperature, and it can germinate in different conditions. though the highest level of germination is happening when the temperatures are 30 and so on. What this pattern shows is that these species dominate the early stage of secondary succession in field communities of the Midwest United States, and then their demandings are changeable during time. So the domination changes over time, how temperature changes. The second important thing to remember is that the temporal variation in environment influences competition, and this is what I mentioned before. For example, low temperatures may favor one competitor. If temperatures rise over, the advantage may shift to another species. So when environmental conditions vary through time, the competitive advantages also change. And this, as a result, has one species will reach sufficient density to display its competitor at some point. So in this manner, environmental variations allows competitors to coexist, where under constant conditions one would exclude the other. So basically, changes in the environment allow species to have different niche, so they can coexist, not really in the same time, but at least in the same area. And this is also a diagram showing the savanna grass species, and they are competing over in rainy season, so dominance is shifted due to the changing precipitation during the same period. So as the pattern in rainy season changed, some species the dominance shifted. So before, in the beginning, some kind of pattern in the first years was Urochla was dominating, but since the rainy seasons changed in their patterns, the heteropogon reached the dominance, because obviously new patterns fitted better, so the dominance changed and the Urochla failed and heteropogon started dominating the same area. And the last but not the least is that competition, after all, can occur for multiple reasons. So next to food, it can be territorial demands or zonation of niches. And then in many cases, competition between species involve, as I said, multiple reasons, and competition for one resource often influences an organism's ability to access some other resource. One such an example would be the practice of interspecific territoriality, where competition for space influences access to food and nesting sites. As preceding examples have illustrated, the competition may force species to restrict their use of space, range of food, or other resource-oriented activity. As a result, the species do not always occupy the part of their fundamental niche where conditions yield the highest growth rate, or reproduction, or fitness, and so on. So in this picture, you can see a transect of Sierra Nevada in California, showing the vegetation zonation and the altitude ranges of 4 species of chipmunks on the east slope. Never mind. So chipmunks are related to type of vegetation they're relying for food on. So depending on the zonation, plants choose that area, and then related to the vegetation, animals, in this case chipmunks, are choosing their territory. So niches also is indirectly correlated to zonation, which would further lead to territoriality, which is directly correlated with the food availability. So as mentioned many times before, everything is really connected and has a clear reason why the things are the way they are in the nature. Okay, so let's go further. This is a nice example of a resource portioning, and it's also related with the zonation and a niche story from the previous slide. So many species that share the same habitat coexist by partitioning available resources. So it's a smart way to divide the resource among different species so they can actually coexist. So when each species exploits a portion of the resource available to others, competition is reduced, obviously. So resource portioning is often viewed as a product of coevolution of characteristics that function to reduce competition. Interspecific competition can reduce the fitness of individuals, mentioned earlier. So in certain phenotypes within the population, function to reduce competition with individuals of other species, and those individuals will encounter less competition and increase fitness, which is of course the goal of every animal or plant. And the result is a shift in the distribution of phenotypes, so basically characteristics, within the competing population. So when the shift involves features of the species morphology, behavior, or for example physiology, it is referred to as character displacement. And on this nice picture, you can see one of the basically best known cases of resource portioning, in this case territoriality, and it occurs among the species of warbler birds. And in this case, as many as 5 different species may exist in the same forest. But the thing is that each stays restricted to a particular space. So for example, some occupy the tree canopy, some occupy the trunk, some forage close to the ground. And this has for the result the coexistence of these species basically surviving on a single tree, the 5 different species, because they're occupying, well, this would be directly the different niches, so basically different stairs of a single tree, so top part or middle or complete down, and so on. This is the smart way how animals, for example, animals decided to share so they can all exist. Otherwise there will be 1 or 2 most fit species, everybody else would die out. But this is the nice way how to share and be able to organize themselves as survival within the environment among all other different species and conditions. So this would be all these presentations would be the end of this section, and when we talked about a specific and conspecific species interactions, and I hope it was clear and you learned something you didn't know before. In case you have any questions, please do write on YouTube comments, and I'll try to explain the best way I can. And from the next presentation onward, we will start with a chapter about behavioral ecology, try to learn something more and interesting about that area. So if you are interested, do stay tuned, and talk to you in the next presentation. Bye.